Good evening. Keir Starmer has pledged today to crack down hard on what he describes as the bulging benefits bill blighting our society. The Prime Minister wrote in the Mail on Sunday, promising sweeping changes to try to tame the £137 billion bill for welfare benefits, which will include a blitz on cheats and those who, in his words, game the system, vowing no more business as usual. Let's talk about this with Deven Ghelani. Deven is Director of Policy in Practice, who is one of the architects of the Universal Credit System. Good evening, Deven.
Good evening. Hi.
This is an interesting take, isn't it? It could come from the new Tory leader, Kemi Badenoch. Why is Starmer doing a Kemi? He even launched it in the Mail.
Yeah, well, I think it's a continuation to a large degree of Conservative policies under Mel Stride, although, to be fair, I think tonally it has shifted quite a bit from, strivers and shirkers, which you saw kind of under George Osborne, to something that's much more aware of the challenges that people on disability face. And I think that's a welcome shift when you saw toward the end of the Conservative government, but one that was kind of sadly lacking at the start. And you've also seen, I think, quite a lot of the consequences of a really sharp program of austerity, and to a certain extent some of the challenges that people have faced as a result of those cuts in healthcare support, for example, coming home to roost, because the big rise in people out of work is people who are struggling with ill health, and that's kind of come about through. Go on.
No, please do finish that thought.
Well, it's just to make the point that people struggling with ill health, had they been able to access health support earlier, might not be struggling quite so much. And that's one. Of course, it's been the pandemic, and that the government will point to those kinds of challenges that are unprecedented. But in that context, for example, the big rise in young people being able to access mental health support, these kinds of things for people with really serious challenges has been one major issue. And for those facing perhaps slightly less significant challenges, who you might think, is it really so serious? I think there's been a shift in the benefit system, again, partly austerity driven, where you've got a system that has become very binary. So before, if you were off sick and you were facing kind of sickness benefits, you could get a small amount to tide you over while you were kind of looking to get back into work. The support you get for that group of people was ended in 2017, and that pushed a lot of people who were in that position to maybe go for the larger amount. And it's somewhat, you can see why they would do that, because there's no support available for that in-between gap. And I think the government could really, what I'd love to see in the white paper on Tuesday is something that restores this sense of, people who are off sick for a short while, recognizing that they might need some help, being able to access that help and the support they need to get back into work as quickly as possible, because that's the only way we'll start to reverse or at least slow down this big increase in people needing health and sickness-related benefits.
Yes, there's a difference, isn't there, between people who need short-term help while they get over whatever is ailing them and those who are on long-term benefits. And the figures are quite eye-opening, really. More than 4 million people will be claiming long-term sickness benefits by 2030, according to the forecast. That's 60% higher than before the pandemic. But are the reasons that you've touched on the actual cause of this? I mean, this is after the pandemic, so it's to be expected, surely, that we'll have a less healthy populace. And also, can realistically Britons get working when we as a nation are so sick after 14 years of Tory cuts to the NHS and the gutting of the care sector?
Well, I think you've got to distinguish between kind of real-life factors that would be occurring under any government, such as having an older population. People, understandably, if you've got more people in their 50s, 60s, they're going to get less. They're going to be less healthy, perhaps, than if you had a younger workforce. And I think this is just a fact that each government coming in has had to grapple with more and more, and will continue to have to grapple with more and more as the workforce ages. And separate to that, kind of policy factors. So you've got that's where the points I was making earlier really come in, where as you say, you've got perhaps groups of people who are long-term sick, need that support, groups of people who perhaps should be taking some time out but getting ready to get back into work. But the benefit system doesn't really distinguish between those groups nearly as much as it should. And as I say, it's become much more binary. So I think one thing a new government coming in could do quite quickly is to recognise that And as I said, for those kind of longer term factors, an aging population, I think there are two main things you can do. One is invest in being able to access early healthcare support. So people who do get sick can get that support and get back into work as quickly as possible. And also, I think the other big challenge is, people who get sick need maybe a bit more understanding from their employers. So putting a bit more emphasis on employers, if they're leaving work, to cover the costs of statutory sick pay more generously, perhaps for a short period of time, with a view to that really encourages them to get people back into work as soon as possible and support those employees who are off sick to get healthy quicker.
But that sounds reasonable to me, and it sounds like the sort of thing that you would expect a Labour minister to say, and yet that's not really the mood music coming from Keir Starmer's office. He's pledging to crack down the bulging benefits bill, a blitz on cheats, those who game the system, no more business as usual. Sounds like a tough guy Tory to me. I mean, we've heard for years about benefits cheats. Is there really a problem with people abusing the system compared to, say, the rich and corporations avoiding paying their tax?
I don't think the two things are really comparable, but I do think I'm going to put the door at kind of, well, partly your door, but partly kind of, in general, the kind of commentary out the door, because I think there are certain messages that politicians believe the public need to hear to get elected, to show they're being tough, which kind of blinds us from what some of the real challenges are. And I think this is another example of that happening. From my perspective, what I'm hearing tonally from people like Liz Kendall, people in her office, and to be fair, what I was hearing from Mel Stride and people in his office, is I think who's kind of much more of an evidence-based Secretary of State. You're seeing much more of that shift toward doing things that will actually make a difference. And that's what, people like me, when we're looking at the white paper, that's what we're going to be looking for, is, are there policies in here that will make a difference, with a recognition that the difference between policy and the rhetoric that goes around the policy can be quite different from time to time. And do give me your take on whether I'm being fair to you and your journalist colleagues with that.
Well, I wouldn't describe myself as a journalist. I'm a talk show host. But, you said that the tax avoidance or evasion and benefits fraud are not comparable. Well, they're certainly not the same thing, but the government has a choice to concentrate on perhaps one or the other with the limited funds that are available. And they seem to be concentrating on the small beer. They're according to their own figures, 6.4 billion in benefits was overpaid through fraud or error. 35.8 billion is the so-called tax gap, the amount that is expected to have been brought in by tax and what was actually collected. So they appear to be, whether they're just playing to the gallery and writing what Keir Starmer thinks that the Daily Mail readers want to read, they appear to be concentrating on the 6.4 billion, not the 35.8 billion.
Well, I imagine to a large extent they'll be going after both, given the fiscal hole that the country finds itself in. And it has always been one of those areas where if you do invest more, you tend to get some reasonable returns, given the scale of the gap. But I also think, there are huge opportunities here to make the state more efficient. So the things we call for at Policy and Practice are things like a more straightforward social security system that's easier to navigate. That reduces errors, that reduces people filling in the wrong information. And it also allows, another thing we call for is, for data within the social security system to be used, not just for fraud, but also to help people access the support that they need. That's one of the things that we've been doing incredibly successfully with things like pension credit, making sure pensioners are accessing that support so they can now get £3,500 on average each, plus the winter fuel payment. So there's a lot the government can do, not just to crack down on fraud, but also to make sure people are getting the support that they need, because it's about making a system that's fair to everyone. And yes, of course, that needs to be applied to the tax system too, because it can be quite, I don't know many people that enjoy filing their taxes, and that could be made easier as well, I'm sure.
Much of the rise in long-term sickness benefits is apparently people reporting mental health problems. That's going to be rather difficult for the government to disprove, isn't it, that someone is suffering like that? Won't those really in need potentially get caught up in a government swoop and therefore be made worse?
Well, I think it comes down to, similar to the point I was making earlier, if some people with mental health issues have some really serious challenges and need the support to be able to recover properly, possibly in a health setting, or perhaps won't be able to work. There are other people who have faced some initial challenges that perhaps meant they had to take some time off work. And because of the way the social security system works, because of access to mental health services being what it is, has pushed them further away from work, because they either had to claim some financial support, went on to long-term sick because that's where the additional support is, which also gives you a bit of freedom from the pressures of looking for work, which might be what those people need at that time. But then once you're in that position, the challenges of going back into work and facing the challenges of trying to get back to that support if you become ill again become quite daunting for people. And that's certainly something that we've seen speaking to kind of clients and partners on the front line as being a real challenge. The more punitive the social security system is for people who are in those kinds of situations, the better it is for people to stay out of work. And actually that points to another thing I'd like to see on Tuesday in the white paper is a sense of voluntary engagement in employment support programs with these kinds of challenges for people with these kinds of challenges, and a real awareness of the engagement rate, because you can make these announcements, and if no one actually wants to engage in the support that's available, then the measures are failing. It needs to be something that people see as being beneficial to them, as being something that kind of helps them to do what I think they do want to. Evidence shows they want to get back into work. That's better for them. But you do have this, ending this binary system, making sure the support that's there is there for people, will, I think, really slow down the increase. And by my maths, I think there's about half a million people or so who could have benefited if that support had been in place since 2017 when it was abolished.
Do you think there's a disconnect among the public with the actual figures that are involved here? Because we have some of the meanest out-of-work benefits in the developed world, and yet the public seem to be, or many of them, seem to be of the impression that people who are in receipt of benefits are living the life of Riley, and they're putting their feet up and smoking a cigar and enjoying life.
I think it's the complexity of it all, honestly. I don't think people who think that are necessarily... I don't think it's their fault that perhaps they see things in that way. It's a complicated system. Some people can access support for housing, some people can access support for disability, you can access support for children, and all of that support is there for people who need it. It's very easy for people who aren't in that position to say, I'll never need this support, and forget that, ignore the fact that sometimes they might find themselves falling on hard times. They might become ill. One thing the pandemic did was show this could happen to anyone. In fact, it happened to all of us, or almost all of us, where we weren't able to work for long periods of time, and we needed the support of something like the furlough scheme.
Do you think? I think
that's another example. The furlough scheme shows exactly that social security benefits are insufficient, because they had to create a whole new scheme for a different group of people who weren't ready and would have been shocked by the levels of support they would otherwise have been able to access. Do
you think the rewards that people can access from work are sufficient in order to make work itself attractive? I mean, the minimum wage is going up to £12.21 next April. It's going up 80 pence an hour. I mean, it's still a pitifully small amount of money. Doesn't low pay rather encourage people to opt out of work?
Well, actually, it's improved considerably, Nick. I think the levels, the increase in when the minimum wage was introduced, it's gone up massively. From when I was.
Well, it matters less how much it's gone up by to what it actually is. £12.21 is not really a very good reward for an hour's work.
No, but I'll go back to kind of when I was pulling pints behind a bar 15 years ago, and the minimum wage then was £6 an hour, I think, and the amount that the benefit system took back off you. So if you were on benefits, it'd start by taking back each pound you earned, and that might drop to 80 pence. You'd keep 20 pence of each pound you earned, and that's one of the reasons why I got interested in social security, and one of the reasons why I started working on a better benefit system, and ended up working on universal credit to make sure people got to keep more of what they earn. Now, there's an absolutely fair point to say, is it enough still? But it's certainly so much better than it has been in the past. I think speaking to people who've been on benefits long term and the people who support them, one of the problems is this kind of an inability to recognize that you are getting quite a bit more back from work. And you are pretty consistently, almost always, much better off in work because of improvements to the minimum wage, improvements to the withdrawal rate of the way in which benefits are withdrawn. You get to keep almost half initially of each pound that you earn, and it's probably fair enough that you pay half back because then you're paying to an extent for your own benefits as you go back into work.
Are you not better off working because the benefits that are available to people are so poor compared to almost every other developed nation? Practically no one that I could find. If you lose your average wage job, how much of your previous wage do you get in benefits? We're at the bottom.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. The bigger problem is if you do lose your job, the level of support you can access is often insufficient, and that's where austerities really come in. You don't get as much support. Often, what you need to cover your rent these days, if you're unemployed, isn't sufficient. So you have to pay for it out of other parts of your benefit income, which leaves you without enough money to eat, or without enough money to even get out and about and look for work. And all of these things have been counterproductive. And it's, we started, the first point I made was about how austerity is, I think, the chickens are coming home to roost to a certain extent with kind of the increase in sickness benefits, at least in part.
Deven, good to talk to you. Deven Ghelani, Director of Policy at Practice, who was one of the architects of the Universal Credit System.